Welcome, everybody out there. Meeting's called to order. May we have roll call, please, Grace?
Chairperson Philip Goldstein.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Marty Jost.
Here.
Commissioner Tom Wood.
Here.
Commissioner Wendy Newland. Here. Commissioner Renzo Bianchi. Alternate Commissioner Janelle Mines.
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Mara Johnson. Here.
Commissioners, any amendments to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Administrative, first, we have two items, determination of alternate voting. We'll not put any undue pressure on Mara tonight, so Janelle, you'll vote this evening, all right? And the second item on there, which seems to be a regular occurrence here, chairperson and vice chairperson voting. Marty and I are interested in seeking your vote again this year. I asked Marty if he wanted to deliver our campaign platform that we've typically done, but
I forgot to create one.
it was so political that I thought we best stay away from that. So with that, Carolyn, I can never remember. May we vote on the two together? Okay. So what I need is if anybody concurs and was willing to make a motion, I do need said motion.
I move to approve chairperson and vice chairperson.
Phil, you
Phil
remember me?
Goldstein and Marty Jost. Marty Jost.
Friends and colleagues for a long time. Thank you. Thank you, Tom and Wendy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Appreciate the faith you have in us for one more year here. Try not to let you down. Consent agenda consists solely of the February 17th, 2026 meeting minutes. Commissioners, any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is approved on a 5-0 vote.
I think you missed item 4.
You're absolutely, thank you, Carolyn. This public comment, this is a time, there is an opportunity on number 8 for public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to offer public comment under the general comment on anything not on the agenda? Anybody out there? Mr. Gross, okay. Hearing none, we will close the general public comment again. Thank you, Carolyn. Item 6, updates. It's been quite a while since this. I just wanted to acquaint you, these are all, as most of them usually are, is what is the council disposition of certain things. Timnath Shore's sketch plan, previously approved by us. Council advanced that. I will note they had expressed some interest, I would say, in some of the same things that we expressed interest in, understanding that, and they understood the same thing we ultimately did, that those would be addressed at a later stage. So that went through pretty cleanly. The Ladera South subdivision final plat, again, council advanced that. I will note, and probably to staff's credit, some part of that had to deal with the, if you recall, the open space in the northeast corner. And council made note, as we certainly did, that staff did a good job, particularly Troy, who carried that ball in bringing that to where we wanted it to be with Ladera. And then last, the land use code amendments on the comprehensive sign plan. Whereas we had advanced that, we may have had a condition or two on that. What I would tell you is council decided, because signage, particularly, I think it's safe to say electronic signage, can be very controversial. They decided that that would be entirely within their purview, although they did agree with the Community Development Director. Scott, I think it's safe to say that it's essentially an administrative decision, but if, under certain circumstances, if community development feels that it needs to go to a higher authority, it will go directly to council. Any questions on that or any other updates? Anybody has? Okay. Then we move to item 7, business, 7A, a resolution amending the Timnath Planning Commission bylaws to set time limits for presentations. Logan.
Good evening. This is just a really quick amendment to your bylaws. We are proposing a 10-minute presentation limit for applicants. Recently, you all have sat through some lengthy presentations, and the thought is we want these meetings to be pretty efficient, and we want to respect everyone's time, and staff tries to do a pretty good job of making sure we're covering all the essential information during our staff report. And then really the applicant presentation is meant to be, supplement that and just be additive. So we felt 10 minutes was adequate time for the applicant to be able to present to you all. And then the Planning Commission chair may allow additional time in appropriate circumstances. So our recommendation is to approve the amendment to the bylaws.
Thank you. This is not no public comment on this. Commissioners, thoughts on this? Nothing. I would offer, I think this is a good idea. I presume it would not have been put before us if legally we did not feel that we have that right. So
Yeah,
it's a
I
good
feel
idea.
like it's appropriate.
Yes. I also think it's good that there is a discretionary extension provision, and I assume staff would carry the ball initially to the chair and say that the developer feels they need more time, and then we can consider that. So with that, unless anybody has anything else to add on that, do I have a motion on business item 7A, a resolution amending the Timnath Planning Commission bylaws to set time limits for presentations?
I move to approve resolution number 1, series 2026, amending the Timnath Planning Commission bylaws to set time limits on presentations.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries on a 5-0 vote. Thank you. Item 8, 8A, land use code amendments. Scott, in a question really to both you and my colleagues here, would we be necessarily, as written, would we be voting on this as a package, or can we vote on this these individually?
I prefer you do it on a package. If you want to amend something, then you can entertain a line item amendment, would be my preference. I think it would be difficult to vote on each amendment separately, would be my recommendation. But we can entertain that as we go through my presentation.
Yeah, I don't, yes, not yeah. Yes.
And again, I want to be mindful of the weather tonight. With everybody getting home safely, we've asked one of our consultants to does have to drive a long way to get home this evening. So this is a recommendation that is going to town council. They are the deciding body in this discussion, so we certainly would take your feedback on those considerations. So my preference would be as a package deal where you would outline any changes that you would.
That's fine. I just want, I don't believe either way we would take any more or any less time necessarily. We certainly want to get it right instead of getting it quickly, but I just wanted to clarify that because I was asked. So with that, turn it over to you.
Thank you, commissioners. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome our newest commissioner, Mara Johnson, for serving on the Planning Commission, so welcome. Picked a good one to kick off our process. With that, we do regularly update our land use codes. That's a best management practice. So even if we don't get it right tonight, we can always come back and amend it later. We've seen a number of amendments that we've brought forward. So I want to give a little bit of background on this batch of amendments. It's a little bit of a mixed bag of items we're looking at. These mostly originated from town council and some direction that they wanted staff to explore. The first one is looking at private streets and residential neighborhoods. As you recall, we had a subdivision approval that there was a lot of discussion about gated communities and public versus private streets. So this amendment is looking to address that desire by council on a legislative item to prohibit private streets and residential subdivisions. The second topic area is getting into institutional, public, civic uses. There were some conversations about data centers and detention centers. Coincidentally, the town is building a new recreation center, so that was an opportunity for the town to look at our current standards to see how the code would apply in these situations. Town council, particularly on some of these new uses, wanted us to be proactive in those instances, to make sure that we're prepared if a data center or a detention center were to come to Timnath. I think we all agree that that's not very likely, but best to have something in place rather than to deal with administrative judgment calls, making some assumptions and what have you. So there's a batch of amendments that are related to those institutional, public, and private uses. So once you touch one, it kind of triggers the other. So that's why you might see the reason why a detention center creating a new definition and use triggered the aspect of a police and fire and rescue station. Likewise, recreation or community center triggered some other of those civic and private uses. So, and then the last tranche is somewhat of a little bit of random things. So there were some design criteria on materials that we're looking to help streamline and account for some innovative materials that are coming to the marketplace that our code isn't necessarily able to recognize. And another one is looking at agriculture. So again, looking at the way the land use code is defined, there's a use table that has agriculture as a category, and then it has farming as a use. Well, we don't have farming listed as a use, so just to clarify some of that. And then if you look purely at the definition, kind of raised a question to me about, well, what about residential farming? A lot of people have gardens in their backyards. Parks Department is currently having some community gardens. Timnath Lakes, I believe, has some community gardens. So there are other things that could be agricultural in nature but aren't necessarily allowed. So we decided to include urban agriculture just to make it a permitted use across all zoning districts. So first objective is looking at the subdivision standards. Again, that's based on the council's direction regarding private streets and prohibiting them in residential neighborhoods. The second objective, we're looking at those institutional, civic, and public uses that I mentioned. There are some new uses and some existing to dealing with that. And the last objective is those minor clarifications regarding farming and materials. So the first objective, looking at our subdivision standards, what we're trying to do is clarify and prohibit that private streets are not allowed in residential subdivisions. They would be allowed in commercial or mixed-use subdivisions. And we also want to clarify outlots for minor subdivision process, so anything that's 6 lots or fewer are eligible for a minor subdivision. We want to clarify that if an outlot is designated as an open space, drainage, utility, or other similar public purpose, that lot wouldn't count towards that 6-lot maximum. So again, that's just a clarification on interpretation of subdividing processes. Identified the areas of code where the changes of this objective would be touching, so getting into procedures, section of Article 2.9 regarding outlots, and then sections Article 6.3 6.3 and 6.6 on subdivisions, talking about outlots and private streets, and then also clarifying some definitions. Currently, the code has street, so now we have street private and street public. So that's dealing with objective number 1. Objective number 2 goes back to the,
So we'll, commissioners, once we get that Scott do this, then we'll go back and
you'll have
look at these one
opportunities
by
there.
one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm sure you have some questions, and I know Commissioner Wood and Commissioner Bianchi emailed some questions, so I'll hopefully address those with my presentation. Again, here, the objective 2 is looking for the town to better prepare itself for some uses, so detention centers and data centers, to better reflect best practices and be prepared rather than reactive to those situations. And then also triggering some updates to current uses in the use table and section of the code. So with that, again, we're touching on different sections of the code, looking at definitions, new definitions and updated definitions for those uses, looking at the use table and the conditions of, or use-specific conditions of those uses, which districts they're allowed, and again, some of the use-specific standards. And then getting into various parking requirements. So again, with these new uses, what standards would we apply? American Planning Association, it's a national association, they have a book that they publish about parking standards, and they look at standards across the country, both on low and high ends. And so I looked at some of those standards as examples. We're also proposing a new concept about parking maximums. You know, I think what the mentality is a lot of places, this is a more progressive approach to parking. Parking has a lot of indirect impacts on communities. Parking's expensive. It consumes a lot of land environmentally, heat island effect, storm drainage, runoff with contamination. So there's a balance about how much parking is appropriate. So a minimum sets a minimum standard, and a maximum kind of hits that ceiling where maybe that's the balancing act that we're trying to strike. This is only for a few new uses. These are mostly civic uses. And again, we're not looking at like the market necessarily dictating that, but looking at the uniqueness of each of these civic uses and how to set that standard. With the exception of a recreation center, the town isn't planning any new facilities in the near time future that I'm aware of. Not aware of any new fire stations coming to town or police stations coming to town. So this is a starting point, and we can certainly come back and revisit some of those standards if needed. And then the last thing is, again, going back and, I do want to get a little bit deeper into parking, because I know we did get some questions from commissioners on parking. So some area examples of parking minimums. So from Windsor, they updated their facility about 10 years ago and did some research across the country. And they basically got to about 3.6 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Fort Collins is building a new community center, Southeast Community Center, and a library. They're right about 2.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. They have the option to add 58 additional spaces, which would bring them up to about 3.1 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Larimer County doesn't really have a good apples to apples comparison. The best that they have for a community facility or rec center is about 1 space or 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And then for reference, Timnath currently, we're just under 7 spaces per 1,000 square feet at 6.6, but we would round up and that would be 7 spaces. And then again, for reference, this fire station over here, they provided 32 spaces, but staff interpreted that use at the time as office space. They'd only be required to provide 19. Reached out to both the Timnath PD and Poudre Fire, and they don't currently are experiencing any parking concerns. They're probably, both the sites are a little overparked. PD also has an option to add more parking to their site. One of the challenges they're related to is the area for the PD vehicles versus the kind of the open or for the public. That balance is probably off. They probably need a little bit more spaces for the PD vehicles, the secured parking versus the public parking. But that's a little nuance on that. I did want to provide a little bit of background on going to the parking maximum and why are we doing this. The town has located a property near Old Town for the rec center. It's about 17 acres in size. If we use our current standard at about 7 spaces per 1,000 square feet, rec center is projected to be around 100,000 square feet. We're looking to consume about 5.6 to 6.2 acres of land just for surface parking. That doesn't include any of the landscaping that would be required with that. Throw in another 0.4 acres. Throw in the building space, that's 2.3. You look at a public street that we're going to be provided through that site, another 1.2 acres. Estimating storm, and there's a major pipeline easement through that site. That's probably an underestimate, about another acre being used up for that use. I've identified a mixed-use commercial area of 6 acres in total, so we're already maxed out, and that doesn't include any buffering other than other landscaping requirements if we were to use that maximum standard. We recently just kicked off the design process for that, and that was the one thing that the consultant immediately raised concerns about our high parking standard. And they say that that standard is typically used for facilities that have the need for high turnover rates when they're running tournaments and such. That's not the plans for this facility. So again, if you're thinking of a volleyball tournament, a basketball tournament, we're getting a lot of teams coming in with parents and families where you have that turnover. You might need a higher ratio. That's not what this facility is being planned for, and they don't anticipate the need. I actually did a printout that I forgot to bring down. Windsor did a research. They probably have 35 communities that I can hand out after the meeting that they did 10 years ago. The average at that time they found was 3.5 spaces is what they found fits best. And again, the range that we're proposing is a minimum and a maximum range on that. And then the last topic I wanted to jump into is Objective 3. Again, just some minor clarifications regarding to farming and new building materials. Looking at updating some new definitions for farming and urban agriculture. Looking at revised requirements in the table, and then just set some new standards allowing some administrative approvals for building materials. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks. I think presenting this as a big overview before we go back and look at each one is helpful. So thank you. Appreciate you pulling together that parking data too. We didn't give you much.
I need a big shout out to my colleagues at Neighbors. I sent out an urgent email and they all responded very appropriately, because sometimes you can look at land use codes and there's interpretations and not everybody has like an apples to apples comparison.
To the staff's credit. Carolyn, question. Now we're going to go back. May I open public comment first before then we're going to discuss each thing since we've given an overview?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Is there anybody wishes to offer any public comment on this?
I forgot to mention, we did have a information meeting last week where 3 people from the public did attend.
It was helpful. I expected to see them here tonight, but you did such a good job of addressing their concerns that day. Perhaps they didn't want to come out in this weather, but thanks. Okay, no public. Will then close the public comment. And Scott, if we could please now, let's go back and bring these up one at a time in whatever order you want to, you prefer. In breaking it down, for instance, with the subdivision standards, we got the outlots and we have the private streets. So let's tackle the private streets first.
Yeah, and again, I think at least the feedback I got from the 2 commissioners was probably Objective 2 is probably the area of most interest, but I didn't receive too many concerns on this objective, looking at the private streets and outlots.
Okay, well, let's, as I say, bring it up here. Who wants to offer first?
I'll go.
Marty?
Just one question is, what's really driving this of why we don't want to have private streets?
Oh, Marty, you're asking a big policy question. So town council, when we were looking at the White Wing subdivision,
Mhm.
this all really started with gated communities. Our old zoning code actually didn't allow for gated communities, and when we updated our new code, nobody could figure out why that requirement wasn't in there. Long story short, that subdivision process is moving forward so that they are not able to do a gated community. And the conversation actually even goes back a little bit further. When I first started working here, we talked about this with Ladera, about the challenges with private streets, building orientation, setbacks. At that time, again, council directed staff to look at limiting private streets to only commercial subdivisions and not residential. So it's 2 times now that council has said we really want to clarify that private streets are not eligible in residential neighborhoods. It's really meant to be a public amenity that are open to the general public. It would be maintained by the town, and they adhere to town standards. Where it's a private street, they tend to want a waiver from those standards. We hold them to the Lucas, the Larimer County urban area street standards. We hold them to that. But often developers are looking for ways to maybe deviate from those standards in private streets. So really is looking at making sure we're building a durable, consistent cross-section of our streets.
So it's just, I guess at a very high level, it's just maintaining open communities
And consistency.
yeah, because some that I've seen that are private streets are not as well maintained.
And honestly, most members of the public honestly don't know. Many communities do it differently. Some use different colored street signs, and they have like 0.2 font that says this is a privately maintained street. When members of the public call in and they like, well, hey, I have this issue, and I'm like, well, sorry, you're going to have to contact your HOA or whatever. So I think from like me personally, when you get from a customer service perspective from a resident, like we want to make sure we're holding a consistent standard throughout the town.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioners, other questions on private streets? I have a couple.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it would be allowed in commercial and mixed use. So can you explain how the mixed use would fit around that private public?
Well, again, that we don't really have any true kind of mixed use developments yet per se. There's most of our areas are kind of still in the Euclidean zoning where you have a zoning district. Ladera might have a potential for that aspect coming in. They do have a multifamily aspect coming in there. So again, it gets a little bit difficult when you're looking at what the Metro District and the BID, the Business Improvement District, what those entities would fund and support for those streets. And again, they sometimes look for ways to accommodate different users with that. I can't think of an example where we would have a current mixed-use project coming in, and it will largely depend on the lot size and area. And if there already is public streets available, then they may not need to provide any private streets. It might just be through drives and access that way.
Thank you.
Anyway, we have a use tax or a fee that in some small part or some whole part is dedicated to infrastructure, maintenance of, is that correct? It's not within our purview, above our pay grade certainly, but what, and I'll tell you where I'm going with this. I just wanted to
So
that clear
very high
anyways.
level, and again, I don't know that, and Justin might be able to weigh in a little bit, but Timnath doesn't collect much in property tax, and generally property tax funds some of those things. We collect a very small amount. The majority of our revenue comes from sales tax, which includes the use tax. So yes, we do get a one-time bump on that use tax. Oftentimes, that goes to pay for staff time and other things, so it's not necessarily going to pay for streets. There are some impact fees that helps pay for the proportionate growth. But Justin, I don't know if you have any insights on revenue versus supporting that infrastructure.
Yeah, for Timnath, the way the streets are paid for is like Scott said, through the sales tax. There is on your property tax that goes to the county, and they do a share back of about 50%, but it's not very many mills. I would have to go back and look. The other way is through gas tax. So when you go gets gas, there's a portion of that is what's called a highway user tax funds that we get back based upon our mileage. So I know some cities do have additional on their utility bills for street maintenance. The challenge with Tinmouth is we don't have like a utility billing department because we don't have like water district, or, the water districts cover all that. So we don't have like a water utility or any utilities where we could charge that maintenance tax. So
Yeah.
hopefully that answers your question.
Well, it does, and I'll just tell you why I asked it. I presume, unlike various agencies, police, fire, utilities, everything else that is part of the checklist of a new development, check off everything checks. I presume you're never asked, hey, we're going to approve a new development. Are you able to maintain all those streets? It's just a given that that's going to happen. And of course, none of these fees, impact fees, they're not dedicated fees necessarily. But that's really the case, right? You weigh in on these things to see if they pass muster on the things that are within your purview, but it's a given that the town's going to maintain the streets in a new development.
Yeah, so I mean, you have the tax or the fees for development, and also developers pay or improve the streets and then dedicate them to the town. So part of the thing is just when we budget, we make sure we look at all the buckets, make sure we have good enough funds to pay for that. And we have implemented in the last year what's called a pavement management program. So we take into account all these new streets, and part of the budget season is we go through and make sure that we cover the cost. We look at the streets, make sure there are certain levels of service. So the town is really into, when we do look at developments, we consider all that, and we make sure that the money is funded for the maintenance.
Thanks, Justin. Commissioners, any other questions on this? It's not often that there's a certain separation between planning commission and council. It's not often that we go into something where we know council it's a high priority for them, but we certainly heard this in a number of contexts already. So, but I think it is a good idea for the consistency, and I'm glad it's not doesn't apply, in your opinion. No need to have it apply to commercial developments because you have some means perhaps of not having residents stuck with the bill, if you will.
Yeah, again, this is our first step at looking at, there's certainly room for improvement on those mixed use and commercial subdivisions, because we're still running into some challenges about the building placement and orientation and setbacks and just good old urban design. It makes it challenging when some of those access tracks don't have those parameters in place. So you might see something in the future. We'll see.
Commissioners, we're not voting separately, obviously, on this. Anybody else have anything to add, any verbiage or otherwise? Put your microphone on.
A big part of this is when developers put forward a plan, we look at the streets, we look at the stormwater and make sure that it's adequate, because they build it and then the town is dedicated or takes it over. So we want to make sure it's built right the first time. And that's kind of sort of why we look at these plans as a planning commission, to make sure that they do have streets that are wide enough, that they have curb and gutter, and they have stormwater facilities that meet general standards.
Yeah, you said it better than I did. That's why I said in the checkoff of everything, I just wanted to make clear in the checkoff, at no point does Justin's department say, nope, we can't afford that. I got to have 6 more people to plow the streets and pave them and everything.
That's why they inspect the streets before we take them over, to make sure that they're built right the first time. And we don't have to fix them, hopefully, for 30 years or more.
Exactly.
That doesn't always happen.
Anything else in this item? Okay. When we move on to outlots, would you, and I'm going to be particularly mindful of our new commissioner and our not so new commissioners, including our older commissioners, could you talk about first of all, what are outlots, and anything else that comes along, we'll do the same thing. as you explain what your proposal is here.
Yeah, so an outlot, when you see on a plat, can sometimes serve a couple purposes. So what this is specifically targeting are outlots that are already designated as open space, drainage or utility areas, easements that serve some other public purposes, common open space. Sometimes when you see a plat come in, sometimes these outlots are just for future phase. It's just an outlot, gives its boundaries, and you might see something on a sketch plan of what that is. And so when we look at a more streamlined process like a minor subdivision, there was an interpretation on, well, do you count an outlot that was already designated as an open space as part of that discussion? This is just clarifying that language, that lot's already got a designated, platted, recorded use on it, and it's not being held as a temporary holding pattern. So we certainly want to avoid a situation where you have a larger area where somebody could keep coming back in for minor subdivisions, and so that's the clarification that these outlots are already designated. If you go above that 6 count, then you go into major subdivision, which requires neighborhood meetings and a little bit different process.
And outlots cannot be developed. They're not buildable lots.
By definition, it would be not developable, right? Yep, okay, thank you. Mara, anybody else? Does that help? Helps me. Okay. Yeah. So, commissioners, questions, comments on the outlot issue? And you've got outlawed on another one coming up here as well. So, you want to talk about them both at the same time? Are there any nuances about the second outlot? Nope.
No, that's just different parts of the code that this topic touches on regarding outlots. And again, thanks for Logan for clarifying that. I was confusing tracks and outlots, but yeah. Really, it's just the different areas of code that these two things are touching.
Yeah, I was just trying to move to your early thing, try and move it along. Okay, regarding the outlots, commissioners, questions, comments? Nothing. Okay. With that, why don't you move on to the next one?
So again, the next topic, happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think I got a range of questions on some parking, maybe a little bit on data centers. There's a lot of conversation going around data centers across the country. State actually was entertaining, I don't know where it is right now, about putting some guardrails around data centers. I recently met with Poudre Valley REA to understand the energy piece. Energy is highly regulated. We're not getting in that game. Generally speaking, as a utility provider, they are required to provide energy regardless. What they would do is if a data center came to Timnath, they would require that they do a feasibility study and make them pay for their energy. The way that this code is drafted is try to find the Goldilocks section of a data center. I'm not trying to, and you guys know what the reference to Goldilocks is. What the standards that I drafted are trying to hit the sweet spot of allowing small microscale level data centers. We currently have one in Timnath, and I don't want to prohibit those. It doesn't use a lot of energy. It doesn't use any water. But if I make the code too restrictive, then that sort of use would not be allowed. But at the same time, I want to make sure we're protecting our utility providers, that if by a wild chance a large data center decided to locate in Timnath, we do have some standards to look at and to apply. So that's the structure that was created. I believe the megawatt energy amount is generally looking at about equivalent of 80 single-family homes in the energy use that they would use. If it goes above that, it starts triggering that they have to provide some on-site energy to augment that. I'm again getting with at least PVREA. I wasn't able to meet with Excel Energy. They do have requirements on when you sell the energy back to the grid, and it gets really complicated. So that's not what this is designed to do. And then worked with one of the water districts. They actually have a policy that's basically verbatim that was included in the standards about the water requirements that basically the water district would have to sign off before any data center would come into Timnath. A little bit on the detention centers, and again, highly unlikely one would come into town. But generally, there's been a lot of concern about data centers and ICE leasing out facilities. And so what the code is targeting is allowing local detention centers, a jail. These are generally very short-term holding facilities. So the way the code and the definitions are defined are to distinguish the two. And so again, that's where it started touching on some of those other aspects. So I think that's generally some of the questions that I received, but happy to answer any others that you may have.
Yeah, let's take data centers first. Questions?
So
Mr. Smarty?
a few things on the data center. One is under 4.14.1, that first paragraph, it just ends with facilities, facility may function as a edge or enterprise facility. It's just one of those where it's a picky point, but technology and things move pretty quickly, and if you define it too tightly like that, you may have to go in and redefine it. You know, so I'm not sure it adds value to put that last piece in. I'm not sure if we were trying to exclude something, I guess, is one of the questions.
Again, with the code, I'm looking for that strike zone of a Goldilocks,
Yeah.
you know, so that could be an edge or enterprise. So Pulse Fiber has a data center in Timnath, and
Yeah.
it doesn't meet any of these
Mm-hmm.
criteria. Without having anything, then staff is really left in a difficult situation of determining what use category it is, coming up with standards. And so this
Yeah.
is, again, to be proactive in at least establishing something.
Yep.
I'd rather have something that comes in than nothing. And if we need to change it, we can change it. We've been at this many times, and we will continue to be. But yeah, that megawatt footprint size would probably get to be that edge kind of data
Yeah.
center where they're supporting the internet in a regional but not a national kind of aspect.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if we have a max energy consumption, why not have a max water consumption? I know we're asking, we're telling them that they need approval from the water provider, but the concern there is they can say yes, and it may come at the price of future development, because we've seen Severance and Wellington and others, they can't build new houses unless more taps become available. So, applying a maximum there, whether it be tap size, which I think has a consumption limit attached to it, or an MGD measurement or something.
So I proposed that we had some threshold of a volume of water, and that was the feedback I got from one of our water utility providers.
Mm-hmm.
Also, not all of them are water cooled. Many are actually air cooled, which brings up other nuisances with they're noisy.
That was the
fans
next thing
running.
about noise
And
concerns.
so again, trying to find that sweet spot
Yeah.
of not completely banning them,
Yeah.
because there are maybe some unique novel instances in Timnath where a very small data center might make sense. So that's why there isn't a gallon thing. The wattage, generally that's what I've been seeing in the research of how you classify them on small, medium, or large is how much energy they consume, because they do consume a lot of energy.
Yeah, no. I guess the thing I would say, and then I'll leave it, is, having a water consumption maximum, I think protects the town, and the water districts don't necessarily have that in their view of protecting us. I just would hate to see any size data center come in and use water that we're trying to figure out how to save.
Let me ask this. have perhaps other questions, others will too, but while you're on this, lest I forget, when you ask any of these providers, in this case utility providers, are you capable of meeting the standard for this development or this, whatever it is? Is there any, see if you can help me with what I'm trying to get to. Are you going to get a objective answer that is free from the fact they are selling that utility? So you see where I'm going, Carolyn? You nodded your head, so I think you can help me. In other words, just them saying, yeah, we can meet that, does that necessarily ease our mind, ease Marty's mind, which I agree with,
Yeah,
water
I
and
think it
noise?
should ease your mind because the districts that provide water are special districts. So they have elected local, usually residents or property owners that sit on their board of directors. And, they're planning for the future of their district too. They're well aware of the shortages of water and the renewable water resources. So they're always going to be balancing. This year, if there's a lot of watering restrictions, sure, the revenue is lower, so they do more long-term planning because of that. But I would think that yes, generally, the idea of getting a one-time windfall for tap fees is not going to outstrip the need to plan for the future. And so I'm not too concerned about it being a monetary driven decision because it is a governmental entity looking at the best interest of their entire district. So it's possible, certainly tap fees are an incentive, but I think there's a lot of things that they're going to be looking at for their long-term planning.
So I will further add that it's no different than any other development that we refer to our partners in making sure that they can provide those services. So I will say that at least with PVRA, their example is they often find that most data centers are looking for kind of what we saw happen in Windsor with the former Kodak plant, is they already had a large vacant industrial use that already had all that infrastructure there, and that was kind of an easy way for a data center to come in. Somebody to come in to build a new one is going to probably be that's not the easy pathway forward for data centers. They're looking for that already established energy that's been provided to that area, and they're just refilling that gap. To add anything new, likewise with the water, that's going to be an investment that the developer would have to pay to upgrade those facilities, and they'd have to bear those costs and not by their ratepayers. That's a very consistent message from all utility boards and providers, is they're always out to protect their ratepayers. Excel actually just adopted a new policy, again, not deferring those costs onto their ratepayers because they don't want large data centers to impact the utility rates.
Thanks. It only took me 15 years to ask that question. Marty, you raised that issue as far as noise. Well, I'll ask you both together. Any thoughts about adding noise standards to that?
The town code has general noise standards.
Would that apply to this as well?
It would. I'd have to look it up to know, unless maybe that's what Scott's doing, but.
Well, and I'm just looking at the use districts, pay attention to where they're being permitted. So land zoned agricultural or industrial and regional commercial. So at least the industrial and regional commercial, those are pretty active, loud areas with traffic and what have you, but certainly you could get into nuisance and other general noise stuff. Again, I'm thinking the size and scale we're looking at, they're probably not going to be using the air conditioning. I don't know, Justin, do you know if the Pulse facility, it's probably an air conditioned facility, yeah.
It would have to be.
I mean, these are pretty small scale, so I mean, it's no different than any commercial building having their,
My
Air
kids' gaming
conditioners.
computers are water cooled, so.
When you mentioned it, by the way, when you mentioned the Pulse, that's the one that's adjacent to the Public Works building, correct? And that's,
yeah.
when you said it doesn't meet the criteria, meaning it's well
It'd be-
below
It's
what?
well below, way below the threshold.
Okay.
Not even close to what the
Oh,
threshold
yeah,
is.
it's a side,
so,
it looks like a, outbuilding.
Yeah.
So, Marty, do you feel, you raised these two concerns, do you feel it's worthy of attempting, and is there any verbiage? Or are we sufficient?
I think the
We have-
noise thing is probably covered adequately, given the zoning in, what's in the code. Still concerned about the water. You know, if it's just me, that's fine.
Well, let me have, because we kind of hogged the conversation here, what other commissioners, Tom, I have a feeling you
I've got a couple of
have questions.
comments, and I passed some on to Scott earlier. In the table, you list data centers permitted under agricultural areas. I would presume that we would rezone from agricultural to industrial before we permit something like that.
It's just a proposal, so again, that one could go there. Again, Timnath doesn't have very much agricultural land, and it's pretty far away from many uses. Certainly, if that's an area that you don't think is appropriate, then you could.
That would be my concern, is that we'd probably want to protect any agricultural areas because we don't have very many. And unless it was rezoned as industrial or commercial, I don't think it's appropriate for a data center. Likewise, in the same table, detention facilities are not allowed anywhere. I would assume that maybe an industrial would be a conditional permitted use. If you leave the whole thing blank, we might be accused of not allowing them anywhere, and that might be a bad thing.
Let's
That-
tackle
that's-
I know that's really not your intent. You were trying to tie the two together, but
Yeah.
I'm going to, I am
I
in
just think
agree.
that this table needs maybe a few edits.
We'll tackle the detention center.
Yeah, that's
But-
separate.
So
But I do agree with you on the initial
We don't want to
issue.
be arbitrary or capricious and
Yeah.
not allow them anywhere.
Well, no, I think your main point of that point is we don't have much agricultural, so it would seem like we'd want it to be industrial.
Correct. For the data centers, if you feel like that's not appropriate in agricultural, then you can debate if you want that. The intent is to prohibit data or detention centers within Timnath, so that is not, that's an intentional policy discussion. It's not a oversight. So that
Okay.
is
And
the general
I'm
sense
okay
that.
as long as that's your plan.
Yep.
And then the last one, on the bottom, you have farming, and then you also have a definition for urban agricultural in here. I'm assuming that some of these, that you're only allowing farming in agricultural areas, but you also allow on the code things like farm stands in commercial and industrial areas, and even in rural estate areas, or residential estate areas. So I think that there may be a disconnect between what's already in the code for things like farm stands, and then you're not allowing any farming in an area where you could have a farm stand. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't really say where urban agricultural things are allowed at all. Is that maybe something we
Go ahead,
missed?
Scott, but we're going to, I know, again, you're tying it together with,
Yeah.
and I agree with you on
I just want to make sure
So-
this table
Yeah.
makes sense.
I know.
So, definition of agriculture is in the current land use code.
Mhm.
And then we added farming, it says see agriculture. And pretty much that is just to clarify, because if
Then
you
you
look at
had,
our. if-
you have a new
let me-
definition
Commissioner-
for urban agriculture.
Correct, let me finish my explanation, please. So, not changing farming and where it currently is, that's not changing. The only thing that's changing in the use table is urban agriculture, which allows farm stands, growing of your own things, or, gardens and what have you, because when looking at it, if pure hard interpretation, I don't think that's what people in Timnath would want, is I think people would want to have a farm stand, would want to have a community garden, and would have that, and it's not a pure, I don't want to say industrial farming, but a more traditional view of what farming is, where you have large acreage and cattle
Sure.
or whatever.
I
So
think
that
what-
was the intent. There really wasn't changing ag use in farming per se. It was really more looking at there wasn't a hard line drawn between, no, you couldn't do some of these other things that seemed like it's pretty common practice.
Something to consider, Scott. In our industrial zoning right now, we do have a landscaper who has a big tree farm. And so he is farming trees, growing trees in an industrial area right now. And if you look at the industrial area across the street, the Walker Lawnmower Factory, they actually grow grass so they can cut it with their fancy lawnmowers and demonstrate that they work. So he is growing grass commercially to utilize it. So we do have people farming in industrial areas right now in Tinmouth, and I want to make sure that we don't
Yeah,
oversee that.
Tom,
Those
if I could,
places are
please,
not
and
in
Scott, if I could, let's wrap up data centers
That's fine.
first. I, for one, I'll forget all this when we have to circle back to it. So let's wrap up data centers.
I did have one more comment on data centers. You have under 4414.3, minimum of 50% renewable energy, which I think is a great idea, but we're also allowing 50% of it to be fossil fuel. And because they need 24/7 electricity, we're indirectly encouraging that. Plus, the state and federal laws are now focusing on the definition of what is renewable energy, and there's a conflict. Currently, for example, nuclear energy is considered non-renewable because you have to replace the uranium. And Xcel is hoping to tap into the new nuclear facilities in Wyoming to direct that power into Colorado. So indirectly, you're saying, no, we don't want that. And I think that whole section on renewable energy is probably not something the town should step into, as you mentioned. I think that's probably something we should not include.
Again, the goal was to help protect the energy providers, again, get to those smaller scale where they could provide some of their own on-site energy. They're not going to build their own nuclear plant. They're not going to, yes, they're going to get 50% of their energy from the grid, and wherever that energy comes from, it could be from a whole spectrum of renewables to fossil fuels to nuclear. The idea was that they would have to offset some of that energy use by providing, just like anybody that has solar panels on their house, you're providing some of your own energy. That's the intent of the standard. If they exceeded that threshold, that they needed more energy than that number that was picked out, that would give them an option. Again,
I just think that you're indirectly encouraging them not to build here by adding that to the process.
I suppose you could, without being a smart aleck, I mean, you could say that about anything. We have high standards here in Timnath, which we're proud of, and I suppose you could say that we're not encouraging anybody to build residential properties here because we have high standards. So I don't agree
think
with
this
you
is a
on the-
high standard, Phil. I think that this is a misapplication of something that sounds good, but in practice doesn't work.
Well, the way to approach this, is there, your point about the agricultural land versus industrial, I, for one, support that. Do I have a head nod? We're going to vote on this as a package, but we're looking to clarify any language or see, Scott wants us input on anything going forward to council. Does that, commissioners, do you agree with that we would want to zone it industrial?
I would
data
think
center.
that if you're going to have an agricultural piece of property that you're going to put a data center on, that you'd first rezone it from agricultural to either commercial or industrial before you do that.
That's what I believe I'm agreeing, I agree with you on.
So the condition would be to not permit them in agricultural, right?
I believe that would be the
Yeah.
condition. Staff,
this would
is
be
that?
to
Right,
remove,
just
remove
simply
it from
take
the
this
use
table and
table
edit it.
under agricultural, yeah.
Okay, so we seem to be, nobody would object to that.
box there.
Okay, all right. So next thing is your point, which I am not entirely understanding but I get your drift. Is there anybody that has any further comments about your issue about the renewable energy, et cetera?
The only point I'm coming from, I have in the past designed and built data centers, and having that standard in there, I think, is overly restrictive. Not that I want to see data centers here or not invite data centers, but I think that this could be used against what you're trying to achieve.
I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm just trying to set some ground rules if one came into play. So
Sure. I just
trying to
don't-
look at a comprehensive way to help mitigate one if one came to Timnath.
From an engineering standpoint, that text alone would say we would never build a data center here.
Well, I think it says that you wouldn't build one greater than 1 megawatt per hour.
That's true.
So I think it's trying to discourage the large data centers, not the small ones, that may be needed in, one of my questions on the data centers is that, are you defining data centers within other businesses? So say like a hospital that needs to hold a server room, would they need to meet this criteria?
Well, that's again the trick with what I talked about, the Goldilocks example. So yeah, there are data centers within those facilities, and no, this would be generally a standalone use. So again, the hut is an example of that. Hospital, the Pulse facility that we talked about. There is a standalone building that has what you could call a data center included in there. By the way, the definition is basically verbatim of what the state was going to define data centers for clarification. So Janelle, you're correct, yes. The energy threshold was if they wanted to exceed the megawatts that were identified, they could augment that with that. And then going back to your other question, a hospital or other use could have a data center. We have one upstairs. That would not trigger the compliance with this code. Unless it was going to use a lot of energy and a lot of water, right?
I'm sort of directing this question, Janelle, because this was something I had jotted down. What you're getting at, we could have a business here that, per our comp plan, provides a net public benefit in jobs, sales tax, whatever, but they need a data center. It may be a freestanding, could be, right? Could be. So I think it's prudent that what we're doing here is we're not looking for a huge data center. We're looking to not necessarily keep out ones that would contribute to other business uses that would provide net public benefits. Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at.
All right, so do we have other questions? Yes, Mara.
Thinking about what Marty was sharing about water, I'm wondering if you could strike a balance here that says, I mean, you need that from the water service providers, say it's possible, we have the water to do it, but as a town, we have other priorities, and we have water scarcity here, so do we strike a balance by saying not to exceed this amount, that the town defines the amount of water that can be used by a data center?
I honestly tried to research what that amount is, and it's difficult because technology is changing with how they're cooling these facilities. So some are using water, some are using air-cooled, some are using a combination of, so they're doing evaporative coolers. Then do they recycle the water? So it gets a little bit tricky on how much water. And I think that's what the feedback I got from I think what I did is I tried to equate what a single-family house uses in gallons per year and did the 80, and they're like, that's the policy they came up with. So that would be my hesitation of coming up with some arbitrary number that I don't really have a good feeling for what that is. Again, the 3 different water districts have completely different fee structures, which you're probably very well aware of. And then is it, non-potable water? Like there's all, like water can get really complicated very quickly. So that's why I kind of left, I exited that ramp pretty quickly.
Yeah, last thing I had to add is a friend passed along recently an article, excellent article, tying together Colorado River water use and data centers, which essentially, at least tangentially mentioned that data centers don't always use as much water as some would think. So I support this. I think we're doing a good job. I think we're doing what we always do with any kind of development proposals is we have high standards, and I think that's important, Tom. I don't mean, when I say I don't understand it, I seldom do with you engineers understand the details, but I think if this, is it safe to say, Scott, if this becomes, to Tom's point, becomes a more pressing issue, it would be something that, as we like to say, these are living documents, we would amend them in the future as we are now.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, a best practice, so this isn't a one and done thing. I'm hoping I don't have to deal with the data center, but I'd better have something than nothing, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
Anything else? So the only thing we're talking about is when we're moving the check.
The check boxes for farming, I had some issues with, and I think I passed some of that on to you earlier, Scott. I just think that currently it's not allowed in industrial or commercial or even rural residential. Maybe conditionally we would.
So I think some of the examples you're listing, I'm not 100% sure, are not actually in the corporate boundaries of Timnath.
Sure, I understand
and
that.
so that would be part of an annexation process. We always get into lawfully non-conforming uses, so if one of those areas were to come in, who knows what the developer, what plans they would have for those existing facilities. Honestly, I think the example about Walker's a stretch, that they're growing grass to mow grass to demonstrate. I probably don't think anybody would interpret that as farming. But I certainly appreciate your observations, and I want to make sure it's right. Again, the intent was to make sure that agricultural uses are part of our community, and that was the intent of making sure that urban ag is capturing some of that, and the farming piece is again consistent with the current code. And again, I think those instances are not within the corporate boundaries of Timnath.
Sure. I know we're eager to maybe find a small grocery store in Tinmouth someday. I'm working with a grocery store chain right now who's putting hydroponic farms in the parking lots to grow greens for their grocery store. So those kinds of things may be a future use.
And again, that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. You had a number of questions. So the industrial use, there could be some interpretations of warehousing and food distribution is an industrial use, that those kind of hydroponic facilities wouldn't be classified as agricultural. They would be more as a manufacturing, warehousing aspect when I was looking at the code. So thank you for bringing that up.
They just put one behind the hospital.
Right. So currently, I think we have enough to deal with that. Not specifically, but with our current code, I think those would be permitted within the industrial districts.
You have what you need, Scott, for data centers. Can we move on? You have,
Absolutely.
thank you.
The one last thing on that, I'll let the water thing go, but, it just, continue to look at it and see, maybe, like I said, maybe the tap size could be a logical thing, but I'll let it go.
3/4 inch tap can consume a lot of water. But yeah.
Okay, next.
Absolutely, we'll look at it, and it's not looking like the state's going to pass anything. They may next session.
Okay, next one, detention centers. That next?
It's sure,
Okay. Yep.
absolutely. We're
Oh,
proposing
well,
to ban.
that was
proposing to
next
ban
on
them?
yours. So I see what we're talking about, it's prohibited.
Correct.
Wendy,
So,
we haven't heard from you yet.
we're not having detention centers. Do we need, and maybe this is for Carolyn, do we even need then to have reference to how much parking is necessary if we're not going to have detention center? Or is this referring to the jail staff? What is this?
Good point. I saw that too.
It does refer to, no, it does not refer to a jail. It does refer to a detention facility. And I guess this would be in case there's ever a change, or you guys even have a change throughout the process. But you're right, if it is not a permitted use or a conditional use, then I don't think you'd need a parking limit.
Or just take it out of the table altogether?
Scott, what do you prefer?
I think, again, if council were to allow them somewhere, then we could put a note in there that if they decide not to include them, we could just strike that out of the parking table.
Could you, when this comes before council, to the credit of Commissioner Newland, just make a note that you can mention her by name if you like, was smart enough to note that if we don't have them, why do we need parking standards? Just so they know it's, we noted that. You noted that. The Newland clause.
And something else to be aware of, I was involved with parking at the Denver Detention Center, and they were sued because there was not enough parking spaces for visitors. They based the parking on employees, not on detainees, and there was not enough room for people to come visit them. So that was a big deal. So if you do ever have a detention center, even the one across the way at the police department, if you don't have a visitors parking, there's a legal precedent for that.
Again, working with police chief, we don't have, they're having more issues with their trailers in the secured side, but not the residential, or not the public side of the building. They do have an option to add 9 more spaces if needed. That's part of their approved site plan, so they certainly could add more. I don't know that the time that people are detained there in the jail, I think it's very temporary compared to like maybe other community
If you ever build a new
jails.
detention center, we have to worry about it.
So it's very temporary in nature here, where I don't think people are staying more than maybe 24 hours, but again, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't even think they're saying 24 hours. We have an IGA with Larimer County that we use Larimer County Jail. So, I mean, I think as soon as they're processed, they would be transferred to the Larimer County Jail.
And, okay. Anything else on detention centers? Okay. Scott, what do you have next?
I don't know if there's any questions on the community facility, the rec center. I think there's
Not on
most,
definition, but on the community facility, that one had changed from conditional use to permitted with conditions.
correct.
And is my understanding correct that if we do that, we're basically, those become a right on that property if you move it to PC versus C? So I was just wondering, if this is just for the rec center, why make the change? And it just seems like it makes it more open and a right and less,
So I guess a couple points. We did have a voter referendum that did that, and it passed very well, that identified this location. These uses are civic in nature, so there is still the criteria that if it's adjacent to a residential use, it would need to meet that expectation. If it were left in place, it would throw just another step in the process. The current property is actually split zoned, which throws in another wrinkle into this process. And so it's, again, trying to be consistent with those 2 zoning districts with that. Certainly, again, it's up to the recommendation if you feel like it needs to be conditional. I think the challenge with conditions are what kind of conditions are there. There are use-specific conditions that if you feel like those aren't adequate, then I'm not sure what the conditional use process will bring out of that. It gets into hours of operation, talks about other things, so you're starting to look at screening and maybe some other things that would come out of that conditional use process.
I guess the concern was just that it becomes a right on that property versus something that would have more review.
Would still go through any review any other project would, through subdivision if it required that, through site plan approval. Again, the conditional use just adds another layer on top of that. That's just a recommendation of, these are a little bit unique facilities. The town doesn't, we're not building these on a grand scale at any time, place, or location. So again, given the example of this site and the fact that there was some challenges, or not challenges, but it's split zoned. One property has two zoning, two different standards, and that it went through a voter referendum, it seemed to make sense for consistency.
Where are you going with, I mean, you're satisfied with that? Other questions about the facilities that we're looking at? Okay. Carry on.
So some of the other changes to the police, fire, rescue, and public facilities are just clarification. So those public facilities tend to be more utility focused, where community facilities are more people focused. And then again, with police, fire, and rescue station, that's because of detention centers. I had to distinguish the two. I think really most of some of the questions I've received are dealing with parking, so I don't know. The neighborhood clubhouse pool, that was a recent site plan approval that Planning Commission reviewed, and there was some questions about interpretation, which use are we classifying, what standard are we using, so that's a new use, and we do have some standards with there. So again, it's this kind of quasi-civic public use that we're trying to use better language to identify those.
Scott, regarding the neighborhood clubhouse pool, I mean, since you've been here, we've had one or two of these,
Maybe, I think two.
Yeah, and then a couple years prior, we had the trail side. Before that, you're reasonably certain. I think this is a good idea that we're addressing this. Questions were primary, you're right, were related to parking. But this is, I presume, simply tidying up something based on what we've seen come before us and questions that have been raised.
Yes, tightening up and avoiding interpretation and avoiding inconsistencies. So again, staff looked at past interpretations, and we were kind of scratching our head on some of those. And so this, again, is to hopefully clarify interpretations.
Commissioners, other questions on this grouping?
Police, fire, and rescue, there's a few questions that I have there. First is on 4.4.31.1. It says a police, fire, and rescue station must be owned, operated by a state, county, or local government agency. So, a couple things there. Why not federal?
That's where you get into ICE detention centers.
But we specifically say no detention centers, so this seems overly broad.
I actually think it's the opposite. It's being very specific on what facility is and who's operating it. So it's looking at a local or state-owned facility, and it's not a contracted facility. So again, I think that's the intent with that.
And wouldn't this also, if you look, say like UC Health or Banner wanted to put a facility here for ambulances, technically I would think that's rescue, but they couldn't do that here now because they're not government owned.
That's well, I'd have to look at the rest of the land use code. Those could be an accessory use to like a hospital if they had a facility there, but a standalone, off the top of my head, probably not. But again, there could be some interpretation. The intent here was really looking at detention centers and how to distinguish a detention center different from a police, fire, and rescue station. And then you're getting at looking at funding and third-party agreements for those types of facilities, and so that was the distinguishing factor in defining those. That again, it's a quasi-governmental agency that are running these facilities. I will generally say that in my prior experience, sometimes these private entities did bring out more concern because of basically nuisance complaints with sirens and what have you, as opposed to more publicly facing facilities. But again, that's just my prior experience.
Yeah. And then related to that, in the definitions, under police, fire, and rescue, part of it says this use may include administrative offices, storage of equipment, jail, or temporary detention facilities for the implementation of local and/or state laws. So that's not ownership. That just says their local police can't enforce federal laws.
I'm not sure I'm following your train of thought, but yes, it's trying to capture what happens in local facilities with jails and administrative staff and what those facilities would be. Doesn't necessarily apply to a rescue station or a fire station. And distinguishing that to be different what a federal detention center would be.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm
I mean,
misunderstanding.
Carolyn and her
it.
team has
Yeah.
reviewed all these things and
Yeah.
they have been vetted. I don't know if I can provide a better answer. Again, we're trying
Yeah.
to prepare if one came to town.
Well, I guess my whole issue with all of this is it seems to go way beyond detention centers. I mean, the way I read this is we can't enforce federal law here anymore. Not using our facilities or police or anything.
I don't think that was the intent. So it says the use may include administrative offices, storage of equipment, jail or temporary detention facilities for implementation of state or local laws. I mean, it is used, our police station is used for implementation of state and local laws. It doesn't say only state and local laws. It wasn't intended to say, and you can't do anything else. The police is also responding to emergencies. They're doing, health and safety checks. So they do a lot of other things besides just enforcing state and local law. So that was not intended to be a limit on what our local police can do. And let's look at how it's defined right now, actually. We have something similar for a use that, or it was just community facility before, so there was nothing similar
For
about
police fire, there was nothing before.
There's no
It's a
police
new-
fire, okay.
And I think the key word is this may include. So again, may doesn't mean shall. So there does give some wiggle room there.
We could say for the primary purpose of implementation of state or local laws, but that certainly wasn't meant to be, and I wouldn't view a land use code limitation as limiting what our police powers are.
Well, but it may limit what they can use their facilities for.
As it goes back to this use may include. So I don't view that as a limitation, but if that's a concern you have, we could say add for primarily implementation of local and state laws or something to that effect, but I don't view it as a limitation right now.
Yeah, I guess I might be the only one. I just see it as an issue that, it may not be your intent, but somebody else may come in and use that for their own agenda.
Our police chief did review this. I'm assuming Chief Scott read this, but again, certainly understand where your concern would be on that. So that's not the intent, but yeah.
Given Carolyn's suggestion, excuse me, Scott, Carolyn's suggestion, if you, doesn't help at all, in your opinion?
You know what, we're happy to just work together. I can work with staff after this to be aware of that concern and see if we can tweak the language at all.
Yeah, I don't know, I understand your concern about the detention centers, but I also don't understand, why not just say federal law? State, local, federal law is, that's not gonna allow a detention center. We specifically say they can't be here.
Carolyn, any merit, perhaps not the right word, is that, as part of the work you're going to do with staff, could you please take that into consideration and see if that merits any inclusion in this?
Absolutely.
Better, okay. Commissioners, anything, this grouping, any other questions on this? Okay. Scott? Parking?
Yeah, I think parking was the other one. I think there was questions about why are we doing maximums. I already talked about why we're doing maximums. Minimums are set to be kind of the bare minimum. Again, we're talking about a very few uses, very specific, these kind of quasi-governmental uses that we're looking at. Really what's driving this was looking at the recreation center, and our current standard for minimum is almost double what the national best practices are. And so if we were to implement the rec center using that standard, we would probably not be achieving some of the other goals and expectations of this project. So the thought being is we would provide a range, and I know there's some questions of why do a max. I think that provides an appropriate safeguard for our community, that we can't just have giant parking lots. There should be a check and balance to what that is, and not just let anybody come in and provide a minimum and do excessive parking for, the Christmas holiday for one day a year. Parking lots are expensive, and so, the fact that some businesses are willing to oversupply, let the market decide, but I also look at as, when we're trying to balance some of our many goals of our community about open space, about protecting habitat, protecting our water, our environment, and other things, there should be a cap. I mean, we just can't say have a minimum and let the market decide on what that is. We have streets that allow for temporary parking. We should be utilizing that. They're not, there are appropriate times for on-street parking for some uses. So again, this is just a start of that conversation, and that's where some of the parking standards are. Happy to answer any questions.
I would like to hear what everybody else has to say about this. I've got a couple things, but we'll come back to me.
So
Marty?
a generic thing on here, I guess, overall, is we essentially do have parking maximums now, don't we? Didn't the land use code say 125% of minimum? And I guess, so I'm just questioning, why do a table with limited number of maximums when, if it's the rec center we're concerned about, which we said, 750 is a lot. It seems like more site plans than not, we go below the minimum. There's been a lot of them anyway, where we've gone below the minimum parking, and, kind of a lot of them before your time, but, the apartments and everything else. So it seems like more often we go below than above. And so we could just do a waiver on the rec center and set it at exactly how many we want that's appropriately sized.
A lot to unbundle there. So parking is a lot depends on what programming is going on. So I talked a little bit about the rec center, and that higher standard depends on what types of activities are going in there. what is being planned doesn't warrant the minimum standard of 7 units per 1,000. We don't, this is our administrative waiver process that we're doing right now. So to kick that can down the road is a cost for the town. Time is money for consultants in process, so I want you to be mindful of that. If you don't agree with the other ones, fine, but again, that's something that our design team is looking at that. Going back to code has the 125%. We have PD overlays that throw that out the window in a lot of places, and so with our comprehensive plan update, our code updates, we're not gonna be continuing to do updates to this code. Our goal is to come up with a new land use code that's consistent with a comprehensive plan. Many communities are implementing maximums. We're trying to get away from waivers and trying to get away from all the administrative stuff that goes with PD overlays and the special aspects. So what this does is start setting, consider it a pilot, a study, a test. Let's see how it works. Let's provide a range at looking at these parking minimums and maximums. So that's generally where this is coming from. Again, if you don't want the maximum, we can set a minimum and go from there. I don't know on the 100 or whatever, 125%.
Just one of those, if we already have that in there, just doing a comparison to see, is that inadequate or, and I did some research too. The communities that are doing maximums tend to be like big urban areas, high traffic, and those that have good public transport. And we don't really have any of those three.
We have high traffic.
Yeah. Live in
we
Dallas.
have high
Got you
traffic.
there.
We have a lot of things that maybe don't check that. We have high traffic. We have limited land. We have limited resources. So yeah, I mean, transit does come with that, but you also have to look at utilization rates. I know a lot of people talked about, and I think your son lived in these apartments. There's plenty of parking there. People just don't park in the spaces that aren't convenient. We are lazy as humans. We want the most convenient, accessible spot, and we're not going to walk more than 10 feet from our door. And that's true in any environment that you can deal with. You start regulating parking with meters. People don't want to pay for parking because they think it's free. The way you manage parking is a complicated system, but providing an oversupply is not the right way to do it.
And I'm not proposing that. I'm just saying, just be careful about overhauling things when we have a standard, and like, with PD overlays, we just have to stop making those concessions.
And again, looking at the uses approved, we've got plenty of parking in these civic uses, and I think at least in the rec center, that standard is completely out of line.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But my argument is, do you create a standard or you do a waiver like we've done in every other case?
Logan?
Yeah, so I pulled up the code, and I think Marty, so we do have somewhat of a de facto parking max. So you can't exceed 125% of the required parking. So, if you have that and maximums, it's like which one prevails. And so in our code, typically it's the stricter. So yeah, that complicates, I think, the range.
Are you
Yes.
concurring are you concurring with any of or all of his contention there, or are you?
Well, yeah, so
What do
I
you-
guess if you have a minimum and then 125% of the minimum, like with the uses that were included, that would be less than what the maximum is, right? And so which one would prevail? Like the maximum that we've included now, or the 125%, right? So I think that it just adds a complication to the code.
It makes a little bit of a conflict, because in the one table you say 3 spaces per 1,000 and a maximum of 5 spaces per 1,000. But if you use the 125% rule, it would go up to 6.5, maybe 7.
Again, it would provide that flexibility, and it could be something that we could amend in the future with that de facto 125%. Just again, trying to provide a range. I think the current practice, regardless of that 125%, our overlays have changed that in some areas. And looking at general policy question is, we should have a cap. That's my recommendation, that we should not just have a minimum, a generic 125 escalator. Each use is specific. They require and demand different parking ratios and rates. And it kind of gets into the nuances of what's in each building. Is it mixed use? What type of activities are going in there? So I don't know if that 125 is the right fit. And again, we're talking at very few uses here.
Yeah, I think we may want to do some just observations. If you go to the community swimming pool in the summertime, they're parking up and down the streets all during the day. If you go to the elementary school during a graduation ceremony, they're parked for blocks down the street. So I think there's some observation. If you go across the street and try to get a parking space at Chilo's, not easy to do at dinner time. So I think that there's some observational things that we might want to look at before we cast this in stone.
I'd certainly agree, but I would just say philosophically, if we're providing on-street parking, I would hope people are using it for graduation days at elementary schools and the community pools.
For peak times.
That example across the street, they have some covenants that they need to be looking at and enforcing on that. So, and we are looking at a temporary parking lot for them right now.
There's no on-street parking in some places.
Which brings up a good point. I'm glad you both mentioned it. And we did address this when we approved that overall development with the developer's consent eventually. We remember, Carolyn, we did it on a kind of a Scouts honor basis, and then when it got to council, they codified it with the developer that if it became problematic, I'm talking about the river bend,
Right.
that he would be obliged to open additional parking.
That's correct. And then that was actually, before they could get a building permit, they had to prove that they had a lease for that property that was town approved. So, yeah, just how this would read is, for these specific uses, community center, data center, detention facility, if it stays here, neighborhood clubhouse, pool, police, fire, and rescue, we are increasing the maximum from 125% of the minimum to the number that's now listed as the maximum permitted. Okay.
It's not increasing, it's actually decreasing.
Well, I think it's increasing in that community facility, the minimum is 2.5. If you took that times 1.25%, it'd be much less than 7. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Data center, 0 or 1, 125% is still 1.
Look at swimming pools.
Swimming pools, 3, but even 3,
5.
3 to 5, 3 times 1.25 is still 4 point.
I couldn't do it in my head either. It's okay.
3.75 spots. So instead of limiting it to 3.75 spots, we would now be allowing 5 spots per 1,000. So we're actually increasing the maximum. And this, I view this would control over the 125% that can be administratively approved. But I do think we should clarify that in the next version of that. We probably need to amend the section on the 125% to clarify. So I don't think you would get 125% of the maximum, because what the current land use code says is that you can go have administrative approval for up to 125% of the required parking permits spaces, which would be the minimum.
And the whole purpose is for all the things he mentioned, right? And then if you go above that, there's mitigation factors. You have to have permeable pavers and more landscaping, and yeah, so I think it would be based off the minimum, the 125.
Here's perhaps a naive question. Are we, in our effort, and I'm entirely in favor of not having more waivers if we can avoid not allowing using PD overlays for anything if but what they really should address, if at all, anything we could do, tightening stuff. Are we trying to make this too general? Does anybody see, in other words, do we need more specificity? At all?
We're not,
More
all due
categories.
respect, no, this is, again, being very strategic on these amendments, looking at the uses that council wanted us to address, and then again, looking at the two examples that we talked about. So hopefully it's capturing some of those issues that everybody did in regards to general. And again, I don't think we need to be more specific. I don't think we're going to solve specificity tonight. This is a living document, and if we need to amend it, we will bring those forward.
Okay. Second thing is, I'm okay with that. Second thing is, if we had applied this is my favorite example, as people criticize floor and decor, always an empty parking lot, and all of a sudden, we got two and perhaps a third restaurant coming in there, and I personally witnessed that parking lot's getting pretty darn full. So we all of a sudden we look like geniuses. That's how I said, not planning commission geniuses. I said council looks like geniuses. I'm always mindful of that. Would we have approved floor and decor parking lot? Would we have allowed that to be that big? And that's the first part. And the second part is then we would be criticized for not having the extra overflow parking for those restaurants.
So first of all, we're not talking about a commercial use on these maximums. So I'd like us to stay focused on the amendments before us tonight.
Okay, so we're not, there is no commercial.
I don't want to speculate on what would have been with floor and decor.
Okay,
please.
yeah, well, that's okay. I didn't expect you to answer it because I think I made my point. My point is, do we still, living document that can be amended or not, do we still have enough flexibility? For instance, the apartment complex, and I understand, I agree with you entirely. People are not, they're getting the parking space, whether it's on the street or in the lot, the closest they can. But the previous staff erred tremendously in allowing that to go forward. And so do we have enough flexibility in these amendments such that if it quacks like a duck, we can keep it from looking like a duck? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Tom gets me. In other words, do we still have, even as I say we don't want waivers, do we still have the ability to say, we need an exception for this, minimum, maximum, whatever it is?
So, with the rec center site, one of the things that we're exploring is shared parking. So with the mixed-use district to the north, when that comes in, there could be some opportunities to look at shared parking, much like which is naturally happening at Floor and Decor. Floor and Decor is not supportive of shared parking, even though that's somewhat of agreement that they have with the Ladera folks. But that's something that we're looking at. Again, it's going to look at the type of uses going in there, which peak activities you're getting at. I think the intent with the town is they would, we're not going to regulate the spaces on the rec center site to prove that you're going into the rec center, but maybe that would happen someday. But the intent would be you would get some of that natural cross-pollination and shared parking that would happen there. We haven't gotten into the site design of that, but yeah, that's I guess the duck that you're trying to paint is, would that happen down, at least in this example, in the rec center site, is that's our anticipation, is whatever happens in the north, there would be some on-site parking provided, on-street parking provided that would augment those peak flows of those times.
So I don't understand the duck analogy, I'm going to say that, but The one of these uses where you are most likely to have another applicant that's not the town is the neighborhood clubhouse and pool, because it's most likely to be a metropolitan district or an HOA that would be applying for that application. I think it would be hard to say they could not go up to the maximum amount that you had adopted in this code. So it'd be hard to limit them and say, oh, well, we are wrong. We actually want you to do less. Then your question is, can you change it? The way you change it, we still have our waiver process. So even once we have, well, yes, waiver applies to parking amounts. I think they could still go through the waiver process to do, if they wanted even more than these amounts, they would have to go through a waiver process before council.
So we have flexibility. It's, yeah. The basic concept of having maximums, I think, is a good one. We don't want to pave over anymore than we have to. Certainly, if I limited my interest strictly to that, I also think we don't want to build bigger for daily use. So I agree with that. I think we've done a good job, despite my concerns with a couple of the community pool facilities, and we have yet to see a couple yet that are, the Kitchell Lake and the Timnath Lakes yet to come, but I think we've done a good job because those are not used year-round. And I don't think we've had terrible problems with the on-street parking, the overflow parking in the streets. I mean, those things came before us and we looked at it, staff did a good job. So I'm in favor of some consideration of maximums, as long as we have opportunity for cooler heads to prevail, given the circumstances. I think, yeah, I got one head nod down there. Mike. So other questions about parking requirements as it relates to this broad category? Scott, you have something else to add?
I think we've covered everything, so it sounds like currently the only thing that I've heard is to strike the data center from agricultural zone land. Staff is going to look at the language about police station and federal laws, and we have flexibility with some wiggle room for parking. And ready to move on.
Okay. Commissioners, anything else? Okay, move on, please.
So again, this last objective is really just looking at some really minor clarifications. I think I answered some of the questions about agricultural and farming. New building materials just gives some administrative approval. If a new material comes out and looks very similar to and performs at least as good as or better than said material in our design criteria, then it gives staff some ability to approve those. So trying to provide a little bit of flexibility, recognizing new materials on the marketplace.
I don't have a problem with this. Anybody else? I think our standards are high, and you're looking to make sure they stay high. Something else that works.
I'm a little bit surprised in materials for roofing that you didn't mention impact resistance. Right now, there's a lot of insurance companies insisting on impact-resistant roofs. And some of the materials that we have currently in the list, like clay tiles, are not allowed as impact-resistant anymore.
We updated the International Building Code that requires impact-resistant shingles.
Okay, I just didn't see the words in here, maybe.
Well, that's not always building code and fire code and planning code, municipal charter don't always talk together. But yes, the building code does require impact-resistant shingles.
At the time I sat through the council meetings on those things, I can tell you they got well down in the weeds, to use your favorite.
I also see that you've prohibited use of fiberglass or other metal-type roofing materials. That may be something to relook at, because I know a lot of fiberglass and stone-coated metal roofing that look like shingles have been promoted recently.
And just to clarify, I think you're pointing to 5.3.4.2?
5.3.4.2, materials, under item B, last sentence.
Perfect. And that section is not being modified, so that's what is pre-existing. Doesn't mean we can't modify it, but I think the red is the new addition.
Okay, well,
that's
maybe
correct.
the old stuff needs to be relooked at. Everything else looks fine, I won't quibble. But I do think that the farming table, having farming allowed in industrial or commercial might be appropriate.
All right, let's move, we're good on the materials. Now let's move on to the farming, and if you want to have at it.
Yeah, just as I talked before, rather than have farming only in agricultural, you allow farm stands in residential and commercial and industrial, and we actually have some agricultural activities going on in industrial zones. It may be best to update that table just a little bit. And that would be allow conditional permitted use in more than just agricultural.
What do you think, Scott?
So again, I think the urban agricultural being allowed in all districts would allow the farm stands.
It doesn't say where urban agricultural is allowed, though.
It's allowed as a permitted accessory use in all zoning districts.
In all zones.
Look on page 16 of your packet at the very top. I think that
All right,
that row
okay.
just got separated.
Got it, I missed that, sorry,
Yeah,
Scott.
so we can do farm stands anywhere, everywhere in town with this amendment.
But I believe it is clear, it is limited to farm stands for food grown on premises.
Correct.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to
If
do.
somebody has a pumpkin patch, they can sell their pumpkins.
Yeah, if somebody wanted to do we'd have a special use permit for other activities. Anyway, industrial land for farming, sometimes that gets into the highest best use. I don't know if that scratches that itch to allow traditional farming on industrial zone land. The types of activities you're talking about, we would interpret under, I think we have a category for wholesale food production and
Yeah,
warehousing, and so that type of use already is allowed in the industrial zone. And so I don't think I wouldn't necessarily support allowing agricultural in our economic engine of our community. Not to say that farming isn't, I'm not saying that it's not an economic engine of our community, but the more industrial side of that would be allowed for food production, at least in the examples that you're talking about, Tom. So.
Yeah, I think in your definition of agriculture, it includes nurseries, Christmas trees, that sort of thing. We do have a tree nursery in industrial zone currently.
Next to the Goodman building, probably, yeah. And I don't know, that might be a pre-existing,
Yes, it's a
non-conforming,
pre-existing.
lawfully non-conforming use. I don't know what their time horizon is on that property, but yeah,
Everybody in town uses those trees.
agree. And again, I'm just saying that's before my time. I don't know what that property was zoned. I'm guessing it was a lawfully non-conforming use when it was annexed.
Would you like them to look into what it is and was, and come back, let us know next time under our updates?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, would that, so now proves the point earlier, I couldn't remember. You did make a valid point about protecting what little farmland we have.
Yes.
And I agreed with that. Does anybody else, if they remember, want to restate what that was, and does that have any merit?
I just think that
Is that worthy of a language?
I think the words that Scott's got in here are fine, recognizing that our history as an agricultural community, we do want to preserve a certain amount of agricultural land.
Okay, good. You're okay with that?
I'm okay with what
Yeah,
Scott's got.
I think that was removing the data center allowance in ag, so that protects the
That
ag
protects
land.
agriculture, yes.
Okay,
It requires a rezoning.
that's good. Yeah,
So, quick question.
go ahead. I'm going to come back to urban agriculture in a minute.
Well, this is related to that. You know, how the way somebody sells their land to a developer, and it's fairly common that they continue farming that until it gets developed. Would this prevent that?
I'm sorry, Marty, I was just doing my motion
Light duty,
sensor.
yes. So somebody sells their farmland, like Timnath Shores, good example. It's very common that they'll continue to farm that until it's developed. Would this prevent that? Because, you know, if somebody's going through the process, they're rezoning it to residential, but they can still farm it. You know, Timnath Landings was the same.
It wouldn't prevent it. They would, again, it would be like a lawfully non-conforming use.
Okay.
Until they come in. To throw in a little curveball, the town, actually in a municipal, or I think the town charter, we're a right to farm community, so there throws some twists and turns into codes and interpretation. But yeah, that would be a
Okay.
lawfully non-conforming use, and they could continue on.
All right, thanks.
I just think it bears mentioning, not to prolong this, at the public forum on Wednesday that was attended by all of 3 people, 2 of them were a couple that has at 4th Street and Parkway a apple orchard. Is it Scott? And Scott did they were very nice. That was the only reason they were there. They were concerned that they would not be allowed to have it. Scott did a great job of assuring them that this was not, I was surprised they didn't come tonight, but perhaps because he did assure them at that point, which helped me understand more what we were looking at here. That was a perfect example of what we're not necessarily looking at in this other context. So just wanted to get that on the record. There was value, and I think they felt much better about it. Carolyn? Oh, you weren't. Okay. Commissioners, do we have any other here? Get our money's worth here tonight? Okay. Anybody last call on any of these issues? No? Okay. Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion on business item 8A, land use code amendments and it states your motion that would include the language changes and the pledge by our town attorney that they will look at the language on the federal building, local, state, and federal, and that they report back at a later date about Tom's concern on the tree farm, which I don't know necessarily has to be in the motion. So if that didn't thoroughly confuse everybody, do I have a motion to that effect?
So it's just the removing the data centers from agriculture, or the agricultural from. Okay, so move to recommend the approval for the proposed land use code amendments to town council with the condition that we remove agriculture from permitted use for data centers.
And Carolyn, do we need to add to that motion that you're going to work with staff on that other language issue?
I don't think you have to unless you want to make it a part of the motion.
Colleague here doesn't think it has to be a part.
No, because it's pretty ambiguous. It's not will be this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second that as Stan.
You have a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. That we approve the proposed land use code amendments. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Okay, would you want to state your reason for the nay vote?
I'm just not comfortable approving it with that wording and not knowing what wording may or may not happen.
Is that sufficient information to pass along to council for the
Wording with the
Specific to the
police, fire.
facilities can only, it seems overly broad language that they can only enforce state and county and local laws.
Scott, Scott and Carolyn, you have enough information to convey that to council that passed on a 4-1 vote, and the reasons stated by Vice Chair Jost.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Commissioners, moving on, reports, anything? Staff reports?
I did attend the NOCO Foundation event today at 7:30, and my brain's not working, but it was a well-attended event about affordable housing and looking at the regional challenges we're facing. There were probably over 200 people there today. Really well-attended. Mayor of Greeley, Mayor of Fort Collins, Loveland's Economic Development Director, the CFO or CEO of UC Health, and VP of Entitlements at Hartford had a panel discussion on some of the challenges. And I think the big takeaway message is we keep hearing about economic development, and really this, at least locally here, the focus seems about getting a retail user, what have you, and the challenges that really permeate that are from lack of ability to recruit and retain employees because they don't have attainable housing or adequate housing. And so that is going to have a ripple effect throughout our region and our communities. And so I think that's the big takeaway message, is that we tend to be thinking about, hey, how are we going to get the next big retailer here to drive our economy? And the headwinds that our partners are experiencing firsthand has nothing to do with, hey, we're going to put this business here, we're going to put this facility here. Is we can't recruit people to come here to live and work. And that's the headwinds that they are facing. So that's just an update. They have a nice little flyer. There's actually a class that they're looking for community leaders to attend. There is a fee associated with that. I do have some money available for planning commissioners if you're available to support that. I think the classes begin in September. There's an online application to becoming a housing leader. It's much like their water series that they've done before. So certainly throwing that out for information.
Would you send that to me, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll mention our water series. Marty and I serve on the working group that has been working for a number of months. Our first effort, we are, as I sent you all, we have had 2 events. Mr. Gross there has been at both of them. And we have the 3rd one coming up, which I think is the most important one, getting down to things you can really do. That comes up a week from Thursday at 5 o'clock, 5:30, what time? 5 o'clock, 5:30. So if any of you can attend, they will be, I'm told, will be online when they're finished. This may or may not be the last one. We may be tweaking the 4th one in the series, which would be 2 weeks hence. But as they say, stay tuned for that. But it's been well attended, great questions, a lot of participation, and I think it's been, Marty and I have been kind of teaming up emceeing this. The other, there's 2 council members, Luke Wagner and Bill Jenkins, and 2 staff members, Logan and Lindsay, that serve on this. And the staff has really done a great job putting these things together. We've just been showing up and reading what they tell us to read. So, but they're really pleased at the attendance and hoping we get a lot of publicity for this next one coming up. Anything else? We've had 2. The 3rd one's coming up next week. Yeah. Nothing else? Well, again, we welcome Mara here. Certainly, if you can stick around for a few minutes afterwards, I want to have a real quick word with Carolyn on something, but appreciate good job on everybody. Great job of staff putting this all together. And thank you all. We